Lisa Richter. I'm Director of Industry Outreach and Growth for CSIA. Welcome to the Masterclass. Before we get started, a quick word about CSIA. Probably most of you here today are familiar with the association, but if you are not, all you really need to know is that CSI's mission is to make SIs build better businesses. How do we do that? Well, for starters, we have a team of volunteer SIs who have crowdsourced a best practices manual to help SIs scale their businesses. In fact, the BP committee just released a beta version of the latest manual, which is 6.1. CSIA also offers a certification program and other resources, including professional development, learning from peers, and access to vetted professional services companies, including insurance and legal, who understand the SI's unique business needs. For partner members, CSIA offers an ecosystem to grow your SI programs, understand your customers' pain points, monitor industry trends, and share your thought leadership. With thousands of qualified integrators and suppliers, the CSIA Industrial Automation Exchange helps SIs, industry suppliers, and manufacturers connect and do business. For SIs and partners, it provides a platform to support your content and SEO marketing efforts, position yourself as a thought leader, and nurture prospects during their complicated buyer's journey. If you are not currently a member, now is a great time to join. Membership provides you and your entire team a full lineup of virtual events and other resources, from accounting to sales to operations, 365 days per year. It also means you and your team can attend the CSA conference because this annual in-person event is members only. If you are currently a member, thank you. If you want to just get a flavor of CSIA and its members, I encourage you to listen to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. CSIA members talk all things industrial automation, and it's just a great way to hear what your peers are up to. One last housekeeping note before I turn it over to today's speakers. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. That helps us stay organized. You're more than welcome to use the chat and chit-chat amongst yourselves, but if you have a question, it just helps us if you put it in the Q&A feature. Inevitably, somebody puts it in the chat, and that's okay. It's not a big deal, but if you can remember, that'd be awesome. This session is being recorded, and you will get a link to the recording in the next day or so. At this time, I would like to turn it over to today's speakers. Take it away, guys.
Cool. Perfect. Let me know if everyone can see that. If there's any issues, please just let me know. But thank you for that warm introduction. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to Copia Automation's webinar on 3 ways manufacturing businesses can mitigate disaster. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share how modern DevOps tooling is paving the way for bigger and better business outcomes in the OT space. Before we hit the ground running, I just want to run through some quick introductions on our side. My name is Patrick. I'm an account executive with Copia based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been with Copia since around 2022, but before that, I worked on the hardware side of industrial automation and manufacturing, providing solutions to a wide variety of different clientele. In my free time, I enjoy long walks on the beach and presenting live webinars to CSIA, but enough about me. I'm also joined by my colleague, Nick. Nick, why don't you tell the people a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Pat. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Buckley, and I'm a technical solutions engineer for Copia Automation based in Minneapolis. I've been with Copia for a couple of years now, but was introduced to them actually in my previous role as a controls engineer myself at a custom automation machine builder here in Minnesota. There I managed a team of controls engineers where I was originally introduced to Copia, and we transitioned to Copia as our version control solution. So I've got experience making that transition, and I'm excited to show you guys more about Copia today. Back to you, Pat.
Thanks, Nick. Before getting to the meat of the matter, I do want to quickly go over our agenda so you guys know what we have in store for you today. So we've already gone over introductions, but from here we'll focus on a few high-level topics, including why visibility is important, challenges manufacturers face, and then we'll get to a bit of a demo and a case study of one of Copia's current customers. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a live Q&A session. That said, if you have any questions or comments during our presentation today, feel free to drop a question directly into the chat or using the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to those as promptly as possible. With that all being said, let's get into it. I'd like to start by first discussing visibility and its importance in industrial automation. We want to shine a light on the lack of visibility in this space and the problems that result. Today, most manufacturers do not have the proper tools to accurately understand what and who can access their critical infrastructure, being the code and projects running industrial automation machinery. And therefore, they cannot prevent or mitigate risks that can cause operational disruptions, which can range from production delays to catastrophic shutdowns with major business impacts. A few things here to talk about, but we know that today manufacturers face highly complex challenges. We also know that software alone rarely is the silver bullet to solving those problems. We also know that different industries create an incredibly diverse set of items, parts, consumer goods, and more. But there are many foundational level themes and commonalities to their problems. Next, we can summarize these into one problem statement: a lack of visibility. Companies simply lack clear and trustworthy visibility into different parts of their business or operation. Whether it be an exec or an operator, visibility is key so that we can unlock new revenue and sales opportunities, as well as run your plants more efficiently and reduce risk. And that's why we're here today. Understanding the importance of visibility, let's take a closer look at how you think about your DevOps practices today and get you thinking, I guess, a little bit more about how you work today. We believe that automation leaders, both for end users and for integration partners, should be able to answer the following questions confidently. Do I have a clear view of where the source of truth resides? Or when my team is working on a project, can I point to exactly where the source of truth resides with respect to the source code? Breaking that down a little bit further, is that code on one of my engineers' laptops on the live PLC or even on something like a flash drive? Or is it stored on online file share in something like Dropbox or SharePoint? Or is it locally stored on a server somewhere? And then, even past the point where the code's been delivered to the customer, is a source of truth the customer's version, or is the integrator responsible for having the latest and greatest? Another question leaders should be able to answer is, do I have access to see a history of code changes or a change log, or do I even have an audit trail at all? Can I tell when changes were made in the past? Can I tell even why those changes might have been made? Was there a request? Is it a bug that we're solving? Is it a new feature we're adding? And then, as part of that development process, did that code go through a standardized or formalized code review process for quality control? Did somebody take a look at it? Or was it just the developer wrote the code up and, put it into the live machine without anyone else taking a look at it? And then I guess also part of that, am I sure that my team has been developing code from the latest and greatest version? Or how do I know my teams are actually developing from the correct version? These are pretty important questions. And then lastly, disaster recovery. If something goes wrong, God forbid, can I easily locate and identify the latest working version of code to recover quickly? Is so critical. We work in manufacturing and the unexpected should be expected. But let's take a step back and see how these practices impact business and operations on a more global scale. Based on research and data that we've seen from the Manufacturing Institute and Deloitte, the annual cost of downtime in global manufacturing is estimated to be somewhere around $4.2 trillion and rising. And then the estimated cost of downtime per hour is estimated to be somewhere between $1 and $3 million across major industries as well. But if we take a look at the state of manufacturing today, while there is tremendous opportunity for growth, there is a serious lack of resources that come in many forms. For example, labor shortages are a very serious problem. We have a retiring workforce who frequently are the gatekeepers who know the only source of truth for code running machinery. And knowledge transfer is, very difficult or challenging. But also there's a skills gap that has prevented younger generations from entering the workforce, in part due to the lack of technological advancement in tools and the ways of working. What we've also seen is that organizations that fully adopt DevOps are more effective and scale better. Teams spend more time on new work and innovation and less time on productivity-draining tasks like unplanned work and rework, remediation, and customer support. Here's just a few of those recent figures on the impact of DevOps. We've seen things like 50% higher software delivery performance from faster code reviews, 67% enhanced productivity, 61% higher quality deliverables, and 66% enhanced innovation. And while it might not be a one-to-one mapping, we can adopt certain principles to OT that drive productivity advances that go beyond more efficient code. These have been a solved problem in the IT and traditional software engineering space for years now. And Copia is simply bringing those same innovations and benefits to the OT space. Now, at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Nick now. Let us show you how Copia is actually enabling this for the OT industry.
Thanks, Pat. So now that we've heard a little bit about the numbers that kind of describe the need why a tool like Copia is even needed in the first place, I want to give a bit of a walkthrough of Copia's source control platform, kind of go through a realist example of what it would look like as an engineer and end user, kind of the day in the life using Copia. And if time allows at the end, I'll spend a little bit of time giving a brief overview and introduction to our automated backup platform called Device Link, though I do want to focus on the source control, revision control as the main focus given the audience that we have here today. So Copia is a Git-based platform, and without going into a lot of the details around that, I just want to describe a little bit about how that works as we go through this demonstration here. So I have prepared here today a repository within Copia. And for this demo right now, what I'm going to kind of be pretending and acting as is just like I did in my previous role as a controls engineer. And then for this specific example, I'm going to kind of be pretending that I got a service call in on a machine that's been deployed, and I'm going to go work through solving the issues in that. But back to kind of what is a repository and how does that work within Git. So unlike a traditional archive folder, Google Drive, revision control of that nature, Git has your repositories in the cloud primarily, and then also locally when you're doing work on them. So what we're looking at here is one of the two main interfaces for interacting with Copia kind of on a day-to-day basis. As you can see, I'm in a web browser right now, and this is viewable from any web browser. You can even do what I'm going to show right now on an iPad. This interface is more for higher level visibility, oftentimes is more used by managers or people performing code reviews and things of that nature. But it certainly is still a very valuable tool as an engineer as well. Hopefully I can show you that here today. And then we'll also look at the desktop application here in a few minutes, which is really where you would spend the majority of your time as an engineer tracking your changes and version control them. version controlling them within Copia. So first, starting with the web application, this is a repository, and kind of want to touch on what is included within this repository. So as you can see here, I have a collection of files that are being stored within the repository. Now, Copia has a broad range of support for the big PLC brands, excuse me, that are out there. Think your Rockwells, Siemens, Beckhoffs, and many more. But since we are a Git-based platform, we can be used to version control any file. And certainly we see our users, and from experience myself, there are plenty of other types of files that you would likely version control over the course of projects and machine builds, such as configuration files, schematics, and things of that nature. And so Copia is absolutely well suited to version control those as well. But as you can see, we've got a Rockwell project and a Siemens project in this repository. And the first thing that I like to show, because I know I found this useful myself, is that we can actually visualize the entirety of a project within a web browser. And this becomes useful for a number of reasons, but the most often thing that we hear is that, say, if you've got a multitude of different platforms that you're supporting, most users are not using a single PLC platform. There's at least some variability there. Oftentimes users will not have the vendor software installed, or maybe not licensed, and that can really slow down development and reduce visibility, because you've got to print it to a PDF or transfer a license or wait for software to install. And so if I click into this Rockwell project, for example, here, we can see that in the web browser, even if I didn't have any of the vendor software installed, I can actually see this project in a tree. We try to match the IDE environment as closely as we can, so it's familiar to you as an engineer. And as you can see, I can look through the project code, including graphical programming languages, such as ladder logic, like we see right here, as well as the other languages that you would expect, like the sequential function chart, function block diagram, structured text. And you can also use this to view other types of things within your project, including add-on instructions, tag lists, AOIs, modules, things of that nature. And since Copia is a vendor agnostic platform, what that really means is this view and kind of environment is going to be the same across any of the platforms that we support. So if we look at a Siemens project, for example, here, we can see a very similar structure, look, and feel, so that if you are one of those users who do work in multiple different PLC types, for example, you don't need to be trained up on a separate discrete system for each separate vendor. All right, so this was just showing the visibility of a project in the browser, but at the end of the day, you need to actually make your code edits. And you do still use the vendor supplied development environment to do that. You're not doing the actual development within the web application. It is for visibility. Now what I want to do is go to the desktop application and talk a little bit about this workflow. So if we kind of continue the story, we were, in this example, I'm told that we have a service call that came in on a machine that's been deployed for a couple of years, for example, and I need to actually make some changes and fix some issues with the machine. First of all, with Copia, this becomes much easier to find the project and see and understand the history. If I'm somebody who hasn't had any experience with this project within Copia, it becomes very easy for me to get the most recent version because it's easily accessible from the web browser, or the desktop application. And if I wanted to get more context around potentially who had modified the code last, or what the changes were when they modified it last, excuse me, this becomes very easy within the Copia applications. For example, we can see here that we have a visual representation of the history of this repository. And if I were a service engineer, for example, I'd be able to quickly come in before I made any changes and see that, okay, Nick Buckley had modified this last on the 27th. And I can go and see the changes that Nick had made, because potentially they introduced some bugs. But now in the desktop application, that's what we're looking at right now. This is kind of the main interface for seeing your code changes and then recording them within the Copia application. If you have any familiarity with Git, you may think of the command prompt type screen that software engineers are used to using when they interact with Git. While we still do that, have that, because we are a Git provider, we have zero expectation that our users are comfortable and familiar in that environment. Speaking from an experience, I'm an electrical engineer by education. I was not familiar with that, and really appreciated that I can see things in the desktop applications visually, click buttons, see things change, just like I'm used to in my IDE. So I have this service call that I need to start. The Copia desktop application brings these files down to my local computer. So even if I didn't have an internet connection, I would still be able to make these changes and track them. It's different than a Google Drive type approach, where Google Drive is going to immediately download or upload when there are any changes. So as you can see, this folder on my computer right here has the same files that we saw in the web application. And I've gone ahead and opened up the Rockwell project that I'm going to use for this example, just to save us a couple seconds. So I'm going to work in the IDE now and make a few changes here to resolve the issues that have come up in the service call. So I'll add a contact here to make sure this alarm only operates when this sequence is in run mode. And these are just going to illustrate, these changes are mostly used to illustrate how Copia shows the differences. Then I'll go to my sequence, and maybe I realized for troubleshooting that I need to split up this ladder logic wrong step in the sequence, so I'm not doing two motion instructions. So what I will do here is bring this jog instruction to a separate branch, just so it's a little bit easier to step through as I'm doing troubleshooting. Start the conveyor motor. Stop the conveyor motor. Okay, so I made my changes there. And then finally, maybe I realized that I'm not calling my metrics routine, and so I'm not collecting metrics. So I'll add a jump to subroutine for that here. And the final thing that I'm going to do really quickly, just to give you an example of what structured text differences look like as well, I'll just make a quick kind of nonsensical edit there. All right. So I've done my normal development work, which is what you would do, exactly the same, whether or not you were using Copia or some other version control approach. How the Copia desktop application works is, instead of relying on some sort of a plugin or integration into the IDE itself, we really just look at the contents of the folder to see when the files have changed. So what that really means is that all that I need to do in the IDE is save the project, which is what I would do anyway. And I do not need to go file, save as. I'm guessing a lot of you, if you're using an archive approach, are used to adding the date to the end of the file name as you save it. Copia takes care of tracking all of that history and kind of removes the potential for human error when you're entering that date or just remembering to track your change. So again, all that I'm doing is saving the application, this ACD file, in the native format. No need to export to a text-based version, such as L5X in the case of Rockwell. So now I've made my edits to the program to resolve the issue with the service call. And when I return to the desktop application, you can see that Copia immediately has detected that the ACD file has been modified. This is a good visual indicator to you that you've changed something and you might want to capture that change, whether that be at the end of the day or at a number of times throughout the day. Now what you can see is Copia is taking that ACD file and kind of performed our magic on it behind the scenes. But now what we notice is an abbreviated view of the project tree that's only calling out the items that have been modified. So we can see these 4 routines that I have changed. If I want to, I can go through and see all of the changes that I've made. So in this example here, I apologize for the cough, we can see that I added this contact. Things that are highlighted in green have been added. Things in red have been removed. We can kind of quickly go through here and see also that I added this jump to subroutine instruction. We can see that I modified this value of the structured text routine, as well as making the changes of the new rung and the edit to the sequence routine. This difference view, we often call it the diff, is useful in the moment to kind of remember everything that you've changed and give a good description of those changes. But frankly, it's more often than not much more useful later on down the line when, for example, a bug was introduced, because you can very quickly and easily focus down on only the items that have been changed. One moment. All right. So at this point, I've just saved the project. And now I want to actually capture that change within Copia. So all that I need to do here is leave a description, kind of at a high level, giving an overview of what I've modified. So in this example, I might say, for brevity, I'll just say updated sequence routine for service call. And then I'll also mention an issue that I've created within the issue tracker for this repository. So it's associated to that. So I'll say fixes issue, I believe it was number 4, with the faulty alarm condition. This description by itself, even without the differences that we are visualizing here, is very useful, because you, as somebody who may not be familiar with the progress of a project, can kind of quickly and easily see in plain English what's been happening. And then all that I need to do to actually capture a snapshot or make what's known as a commit within Git is click this button. And what Copia has done is taken a snapshot of the files within the repository and shuffled them away. I can do this as many times as I want throughout the day. And you may realize that this is actually fewer clicks than doing file, save as, rename, upload to Google Drive or some network folder. And we would encourage you to make frequent versions so you can have plenty of granular tracking of the changes, as well as plenty of recovery points if your project gets corrupted or you need to go back to a point in time where you've before you've introduced a bug, for example. Now, the final step for me to actually share this version with Pat and the rest of my team is to click a single button, which essentially takes care of uploading the project to the Copia cloud. And so now it's safe and stored in the Copia cloud as well as on my computer. Before I leave the desktop application, I do want to show a nice feature that we have that is very useful from the engineer that workflow. And that's the ability to quickly and easily see the history of your repository. And in the example that I had just mentioned, say for instance, the machine was operating correctly at the beginning of the week, you've made changes and now it's not. Well, in all likelihood, that's due to a code change that you've made. And so what you can do is actually compare between any 2 points in time, so maybe between Monday and Friday, and Copia will give you the most compact, efficient view of everything that's changed in a very quick view. So we can go ahead and see the other changes that I actually made before this demonstration now. All right. So that's really the desktop application workflow. This workflow is identical no matter what the PLC platform or any other file type is that you're working on. Exact same workflow. So there's no difference between working in a Rockwell project versus a Beckhoff project versus you name it. So what I want to do now is return back to the web application. And once I do a refresh, what we'll be able to see is that I now have made my new version that's tracked within Copia, and we can see that denoted by this little node right here. We can see the exact timestamp when I've done that, the user associated to it. And just like we saw within the web browser, we can see those differences, or sorry, we saw in the desktop app, we can see the same differences in the web browser as well. So if you're a manager or you want to see the progress of somebody else on the team, you can skip the whole process of getting the file, downloading it, and waiting for your IDE to open. And instead, you can very quickly see that in a web browser. One moment. Now, what can also be done, and what I would do normally at the conclusion of something like a service call, is request that some colleague or potentially even the end customer, if they have the kind of technical expertise or are interested in seeing this, I would request that somebody review the code changes that I've made and potentially even approve them. This kind of workflow is a holdover from the software industry. Software development has been doing this for a long time now, but OT controls has really lacked tools to do code reviews very easily. And so what I want to show you quickly is an example of this code review that Pat and I did yesterday in preparation for this demonstration. So as we can see here, in a different set of changes, I've gone ahead and requested that Pat review my code, if I pretend like Pat's my manager. And I've also requested that my code reviewers team review it as well. This code review step is completely optional, but it is enforceable if you would like your team to do that. And we see many customers following this approach where no change can be kind of deployed into the production version until somebody, maybe a senior engineer, gets their eyes on it. So what Pat was able to do is within the web browser, and without needing for us to sit down in a conference room together, or without needing me to print out my changes to a PDF or use some other separate comparison tool, Pat was able to come in, see the code changes that I've made, and leave comments on them. And so if we look back at this original page right here, we can see that I requested that Pat review these. Pat left comments on them. I can respond back and forth and get feedback. Pat can say these are good or these are not, and then I can take that feedback, make more changes, or eventually track the changes and merge them. So you can imagine that for this specific example, all of this workflow has been very easily traceable within Copia and within one kind of ecosystem. We've been able to see and track the progress visually with this commit graph. My manager, Pat, has had eyes on this from the very beginning when he assigned an issue to me and when he approved and reviewed my code. And potentially even our end customer would be able to have collaborated on this process as well. And then if next week we have another service call come in and I'm not available, it's very easy for somebody else to pick up kind of where I left off and continue on and avoid potentially using an older, out-of-date version of the project. So that actually leads pretty well into the device link aspect of Copia that I did want to spend just a few minutes talking about. And so what device link is for Copia is an automated backup solution for PLCs and industrial devices. What this really does is closes the loop on source control and make sure that the physical reality of your facility matches what is expected within your repositories. And so in a perfect world, everybody is recording their changes diligently within source control, just like you would expect maybe today, everybody put in a new version at the end of the day. Device link makes sure that that's actually happening. And so visually, what this looks like is you have a piece of Copia software that has connectivity within the OT network that typically on some sort of a schedule will go out to those devices, pull a backup, obviously store it, see if anything's changed, and if so, notify the relevant people via email, in-app, or even with integrations like Slack and Teams. Or you'd be able to see this from the web interface once again, a list of all of the backup jobs, whether they are up to date, meaning that they have not been modified, or they've been modified, meaning that somebody, say a technician, or maybe even the end customer, has gone in and modified the code, at which point you would be able to click into them and see the visual differences, just like we saw in the desktop app in the previous section. So I know that's a quick, brief overview of device link, but I did want to mention it because we do see customers, systems integrators specifically, who are interested in this as a way to kind of stay connected to their machines as they're deployed out to their end customers. So hopefully you found this all valuable. With that, now I'm going to pass it back to Pat to tell you a little bit more about how one of our customers is using Copia today to solve their problems.
Well, cool. Thanks, Nick. That was really great. Thanks for that demo. But yeah, I want to take the next part of the webinar to really show you how it actually does come to life in a real world example. Obviously, seeing how the tool works is a big part of it, but understanding how our actual end customers are benefiting and improving the way they work, I think is just the next step. So let's talk a little bit about Amazon. So Amazon, one of Copia's longest standing customers, utilizes Copia's full suite of modern DevOps solutions to mitigate risks and improve the way that they think about industrial code development. But how do they do this? So there's a few ways. First off, automated PLC code backups. Copia Automation Solution automatically backs up their PLCs and their robot code to the AWS cloud, ensuring data safety and version control. Number two, device link for centralized management. Through the use of device link, Copia systematically backs up industrial devices, providing Amazon with a centralized location for up-to-date code from various equipment and sites. Number three, having support for multiple vendors. Copia system is compatible with a wide variety of different vendors and programming languages, enhancing its utility across a pretty diverse industrial setting. Number four would be scheduled backup flexibility. Copia's tools allow for scheduling backups at any desired frequency, accommodating different operational needs. And then lastly, change detection and notification. The system enables organizations to detect and be notified about any changes in the backed up version compared to the last known version, aiding in a prompt response and issue resolution. But yeah, that just about wraps up the main content portion of, I think, the webinar part we had today. So we still have some time left here for a bit of a Q&A. So we will move to that part. If there's any questions that anyone had, now is the time we can sort of dive into some of that stuff for you guys.
Sorry. Okay, that's where I pop in, I guess. I have a few questions I'm going to throw out to you guys. The first question is, what are some of the industrial DevOps best practices you've seen your customers implement?
Great question. Fortunately, being a Git-based platform and a cloud product, we get to leverage a lot of the best practices that have already been established from the software world and bring them to the OT and kind of controls space. So one of those kind of, some of the biggest best practices are really just actually version controlling all files that are likely to be meaningfully changed or otherwise needed in the future. Oftentimes people will limit themselves, if they're using an archive folder, to just the main PLC project and then leave all of other peripheral devices and configuration files with the assumption that they would be able to pull them off the device if they ever needed them. But if your servo drive goes up in smoke, you're not going to be able to do that. And so having those files and frequently tracking them is certainly a best practice. And the kind of mantra that we at Copia use and the broader Git community uses is commit early and commit often.
The other question I have here is, what are the top problems your customers are trying to solve by adopting Copia? How could an SI help?
I can take that one as well. For SI specifically, the thing that Pat and I hear day after day is we have a growing team, and the problem that we face is a lack of standardization between our projects, and that really makes it difficult to move resources around or service machines in the future. And so they're really looking for a way that any engineer can quickly and easily find the most recent code, whether that be for a specific machine or templatized kind of boilerplate code, when they're beginning a new project or servicing an existing one. And Copia really helps a lot with that, because we do have things like template repositories that really enable an organization to have the same standard layout, contents, and format across the entire organization, as opposed to everybody keeping their own template and their own library and using them individually.
I will also add that another big thing that we see as I guess an improvement in the way that a lot of our customers are actually working with their code, and not to, I guess, be too on the nose about it, but definitely just an improvement in visibility. A lot of the organizations we're working with, sometimes it's simply just too cumbersome or difficult to keep track of code changes. And whether you're a manager or a teammate needing to actually understand where your teammate left off, having that visibility is a huge improvement, and it leads to more efficient work, and less, as we mentioned earlier, less rework and remediation. A lot of the time we hear people say, accidentally overwrote someone's work or can't tell if we're working on the latest version of something. These seemingly simple things, they add up. A lot can happen, and we strive to build a tool that actually helps to improve that part of the way they work.
So I do have a final question, but before my slides come up and the final question happens, do you have a slide that has contact information or where people could go? There you go. That's what I'm looking for. Awesome. All right. So I have a final question, and it is, what types of IT/OT convergence initiatives are you seeing in the market among forward-thinking customers?
Can take this first, and Pat, feel free to interrupt or continue on after me. We are seeing now that the status quo of segment everything off into its own part of the network and keep it kind of a black box, especially between the IT and OT world, is no longer possible, or realistic. With new technologies like inductive automation's Ignition, SCADA platform, people want data and want visibility, and what that requires is connectivity between those two spaces. And so now IT and OT teams who maybe in the past have not worked hand in hand, and sometimes are even working against each other, it seems like, have to. And what we found, fortunately for us, is that the IT world has been using tools like Git for a while now. And so they actually embrace a tool like Copia because they've kind of themselves been wondering how, why are you not using a tool like that today? Because they have, so many benefits in their own workflows.
Well said. I mean, that was basically exactly what I was going to say. Obviously, just bridging that gap has become more and more of a common initiative that we've seen across a wide variety of different organizations, especially with this new generation of engineers joining teams. There's just a lot of benefits to moving towards more emergent technologies like Git, like Copia. So yeah, well said, Nick.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for today. I do have a couple of final slides that we can end the day up with, and my colleague Karina is going to put those up for me. Awesome. So on behalf of CSA, I would like to thank our speakers for this informative discussion. And I would also like to thank Copia for sponsoring this event. And of course, thank you for attending. Be sure to bookmark the CSIA events calendar so you don't miss any upcoming events. And that's a wrap. Once again, thanks for joining us and have a great day.